Well, what is up, everybody? Today I am going to introduce you and have you in for a treat because I am going to be interviewing one of my friends and coworkers, Kaylen Adams, who's fantastic at event planning. This is going to be the start of a new little playlist series in my podcast and here on YouTube, where I am going to introduce you to some of the people that I know who do things the best in youth ministry in particular lanes. And Kaylen is the queen of event coordination and event management. Not only is she like really fun and have a really good mind, but she is fantastic at getting volunteers, recruiting them, and when a volunteer comes in, just feeling like they know exactly what to do. And you will, if you implement these things, you will look like a rock star. So if you're a typical youth worker who's not very organized, this episode is for you because it will help you. And if you think that all hope is lost on you, then this is a great podcast to send to a volunteer or a high-level admin who might step in and help you with some of the logistical things. But you are in for a treat regardless with my interview today with my friend and coworker, Kaylen Adams. Well, what's up, everyone? Here we are. I am with Kaylen Adams, which
Yes,
you
I
doesn't
even know
even
my
say
name on
that on
here.
your name on here because
I
that's how
know.
new this is. So,
It is.
formerly known as Maltese, not hyphenated, straight up Adams, which means she just got married.
Uh-huh.
And you might not know Kaylen, but I know Kaylen. I worked with Kaylen, worked in the past tense. We are still on staff together, but she has switched departments. So now she's in the kids department. And the reason I asked Kaylen on here is, what was it? Last weekend, 2 weekends ago, we had our high
Hmm.
school weekend, and you still worked with me then.
Yeah,
And oh
a
my
lot of
gosh,
reasons.
Kaylen crushed it. Like, you guys don't have any idea. And as she was like literally crushing every like logistical and administrative detail of the weekend, in the back of my mind I was like, we got to get Kaylen on so I can ask her, how do you plan for these big events? So why don't
Mhm.
you give us just kind of a quick overview, Kaylen? First of all, like a 20-30 second like synopsis of who you are, how we ended up working together, but then,
Mhm.
like, what did you oversee at these events? Like, what particular like lanes and areas and avenues? And then, I just think what you did is such a helpful tool to many of the youth pastors that I've ever seen or worked with, and so I just think this would be helpful to get out, to people.
Yeah. Yeah. So we started working together because I went to college at the University of Wyoming and I got a degree in human resources management and entrepreneurship with minors in hospitality and anthropology.
There you go.
So yeah,
Something.
yeah. And so I did that, fell in love with ministry there. And then around like my senior year, I learned of the opportunity to do a residency in Texas, which I hate sweating. So my family was like, why? And I was like, I think because I love Jesus. I don't know. So I applied and I ended up getting hired in January. And so after I graduated, I moved to Texas and I did a residency at Cross Creek Church and guest services. But I loved that like ministerial aspect, and I still was kind of doing some of more of that support
Hmm.
ministry, which is so needed and very, very special. Big shout out to everybody in support ministries. And so that's when I transitioned into students. And I kind of brought a lot of my guest services and undergrad knowledge with me and infused that into what I was doing to students.
Yeah. So then, like for the first little bit, I remember you're like, I don't really know exactly what you guys want me to do. And we were like,
Hmm.
just keep doing like, I mean, like you guys don't understand. Like Kaylin was just, she just knew what to do. Like even if she didn't know what to do, she pretended like she knew what to do, and it seemed like she was knowing what she was doing. But it was this last high school weekend where like you were pulling out like spreadsheets and folders and instructions, and even like I remember distinctly, I was talking with you about our t-shirt order number, and like our student registration was like lower than anticipated, and you were like, no, we're gonna need this many t-shirts. And I was like, why? And you're like, because of all of our volunteers. And I was like, do you really think that? And your confidence, you're like, absolutely. And you were right, by the way. And so what like lanes did you, let's talk about specifically our high school weekend, which for those of you who don't know the context, it's like a D now without the spending the night element. So it's like 2 days
Thank
on
goodness.
campus. Yeah, like Friday night, Saturday until like three
Hmm.
o'clock. And so it's probably like our second biggest event next to like a thing like summer camp, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
in that event, what particularly did you own? Like what were those areas? And I just want to ask you, kind of pepper you questions
Yeah.
in those arenas.
Well, so this was, we originally had one winter weekend of middle school and high schoolers. It split into
Hmm.
middle school night, high school night. Well, for middle school night, Darren, the student pastor at Cross Creek Church
Hmm.
alongside Nick,
My boss.
so yeah, so he did a lot of the directional things for that, the vision, and then programming, and I took everything else and like did the logistics of the event, planned it, all the stuff. So by the time high school weekend came around,
Because I wasn't
now
at
Nick,
middle school night. So I didn't play a
yeah,
part at all, which is relevant because when we planned high school night, we did a lot of the same stuff. We just like copy and pasted a
hmm
lot of the stuff that worked and
hmm
made it a little more for high school and not middle school.
oh yeah, and then we had known like what worked and what didn't, so we were trucking by the time we got to high school weekend.
Yeah, that's a good
But
point.
yeah. By the time we got there, Nick, you did programming. So, like everything that you were sitting in a session and watching and experiencing, Nick was all on top of it, planning and talking to the people, like worship people and doing that.
Yep.
I did everything outside of that. So, kind of how we moved through the timelines, when were kids eating, where were they going to be, what activities were they going to be doing, and kind of
Making
plan the
sure we
logistics of
had
all that.
food, making sure we had enough
Yeah.
food, making sure
Yeah.
we had t-shirts and that they were out and that,
hmm
we gave away a little like pin to all of our students. Like you made sure that that was where it needed to get and,
Yeah.
passing out our note sheets and pens and like, I mean, you thought of like every detail. So how, like, I know your background helps you with that, but like,
hmm
imagine you're talking to someone who's not as organized as you. Like, so you come by that naturally, which is what was just like a marvel to behold. But like, what would you tell someone, or how would you encourage someone to think if they're
Yeah.
like planning something like that? Like, what's the way that you help us get inside your brain for some of those
Yeah.
logistics?
Well, when you're planning an event just for a job, for ministry, ever,
Hmm.
you write down all of your ideas. Like, no one's like, I'm just going to keep this all right here. I will access it later. It's going to be there. Like, you will always write it down, you map it through for you. And I just thought, it'd probably be really helpful for our volunteers to see that map.
Mm.
Like, I don't know why I would keep it from them. They should know like how we got from point A to point B. Because then by the time we're at point B and we're doing the thing, they deeply understand what they're doing.
Mm.
And not only can they do what I'm telling them to do, they can actually take initiative and do the things that I missed.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge part of it is just like, if I were a volunteer, what would I want to know so I
Hmm.
could do my job well and feel good about my job?
Mm. So then how did you go about communicating? Like, did you have a meeting? Did you send them a text? Did you send them an email? Like
Mhm.
what? Because that's probably, I would imagine, a lot of stuff. And I think,
Yeah.
again, most youth pastors are like, I don't either A, have the time, or B, want to overwhelm my volunteers, or maybe C, just another reason I didn't actually write it down. It is all in my head. So, I mean, I would say probably for all of us, step one is get it out of your head onto paper somehow. And then
Yes.
two, how did you communicate it?
Yeah. So I communicated a couple different ways. So the only time that I was texting volunteers instructions or anything was A, when I was recruiting them.
Okay.
I never sent them like all the information they needed individually
Mm,
because I needed them all to be kind of in one pot so I knew who was getting what information and it all was the same.
yeah.
If I ever was giving special instructions, it was in a group chat or a group of people that had a specialized role. Those came last minute. They weren't actually accounted for.
Hmm.
And next time we do the event, I probably would account for them in advance. So I'm not texting information because
Account
finding
for
links,
the smaller, like you're saying,
yeah,
the
the like,
smaller, more specialized groupings of people.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, like for instance, we had an escape room. We had game masters, and we didn't know about that until like pretty close to the event. I
Mm,
probably would have included them into all the mass event communication before that time
got it. Yeah, yeah,
as
yeah.
game masters.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So then as I'm putting together all this information, I'm kind of stockpiling it in a folder called volunteer prep.
Mm,
And I'm organizing it by like This document they need to know, this document they need to know. If they don't really need to know that, I'll pull it back.
What are
And then,
those documents? Can you give us just a few examples? Like pull back the curtain a
Mhm.
little bit.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll make a volunteer schedule that's
Okay.
like by position, and then I assign people to that position per day. So
Okay.
it's not by time blocks, it's by day and what they're doing.
Okay.
And then I have a document of volunteer job descriptions. They
Mm.
need to know what they're doing, why they're doing, how they're doing.
Yeah.
And then I do a document if we're doing anything outside or in a weird space, I'll do an aerial map and I'll make like different stations and positions of where they're going to be.
Mm.
I'll give them a service order so they can see just how we do, how the whole day is going to go through. They even see like how different session parts are going to work, like
Yeah.
what songs worship's going to do, all those things, because they help with transitions, like
Hmm.
really help. Because it's easier to be like, hey, after they do a million little miracles, I need you to come out here rather than at 7:37. I
Yeah.
need you
Yeah.
to, yeah.
So
Uh,
more like big landmarks on a map. Like
yeah,
once you hear this
exactly.
song, then this is your cue to
Hmm.
come out and help set up for lunch, like stuff like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's why the service order is so important and for them to see what's in planning center
Because
and for that to be updated.
everything for the whole event kind of revolves around that, and you're doing the same for your
Hmm.
volunteers. And so
Yeah.
because then I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, you're able to be like, hey, if you're in charge of lunch, like these are your three or your or meals, I guess. Like these are your three cues. So
Hmm.
like Friday night dinner, Saturday morning breakfast, and Saturday lunch. Like at this time you need to be here for this because if we say
Hmm.
lunch is at 12, let's say, I'm imagining you're having your volunteer get there at 11:15 or 11:30 or something
Hmm.
like that. So how do you real quick answer this question for me. Like, how do you determine what time to call for them? Like,
Yeah. So when it comes to like food stuff, because they're dealing with catering and vendors,
mm-hmm.
usually like I wouldn't have that start. So we had lunch at like, what was it this year? 12. I think it started
I mean,
at
I don't
12.
remember the
Really
exact
close
time.
to it.
I just know we had it and it
We
was
had,
ready, and
yeah,
that's why you're here.
we had food dropped off at like 11:15.
Okay.
So plenty of time. And most of that was not because I was worried about my volunteers because they knew what to do. And we're not in like the biggest space ever. It was to account for vendors being late or not
Mm.
knowing where to park and all the stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
When it comes to other transitions, they're a lot tighter windows and
Mm.
they're a lot quicker. Usually it was like the song before something started, I would send them to go do something. But again, that's also because their space isn't really big and any materials they needed or resources, I set out in a central location, a table in the main space we all were operating out of, the auditorium, and I labeled everything with all the different times that it's going to be needed and even put under like during this song, you should take this place. So my volunteers knew to flock to that table when
Yes.
transition times are happening.
Yeah, that was so good. So then so you're just labeling those. Like, did
Yeah.
you color
You
code or
label
anything
like
like that?
crazy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You label like crazy. If you think like, oh, that'd be really obvious for someone to know, it's not. You should label it.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's good.
yeah.
Because again,
Hmm.
your brain versus reality, right? Like it makes sense in
Hmm.
your brain, our brain, as we're planning the events, but it might not make sense to the volunteer.
Yeah.
So,
Because they're just dropping in,
right.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
After work, right? They've been at work all day and their
Hmm.
mind is in a million other places. And so like they're, giving of their time and they're willing and they're helpful and all those things. But like
Hmm.
I like that. I like what you're saying. Like, uh, almost, almost dummy proof it, right? Not that they're
Hmm.
dumb, but like make it
Mm-mm.
so simple a caveman
Yeah.
can do it.
Yeah. Well, and like volunteers, they do best when they are confident. When they're confident, they are
Mm,
empowered to take initiative, make decisions, do something really well. When
yeah.
they're not confident in whether or not they're in the right place, holding the right thing, putting it where it should
Yeah.
be, then you have a lot of lag and you have a lot of like question. And that's when things start to like fray and fall apart.
Yeah.
So your job as an event coordinator is just to how can I give my volunteers the most confidence they need in this decision?
That's good. Okay, so then anything else on what you tell volunteers, or I want to maybe go a different direction if you feel like you've kind of covered
Oh,
everything in that.
last thing is leading up to the event, you want to send out the longest email of your life. And that is with all of the attachments I talked about keeping in that volunteer folder. And you go through, you give an overview, and you kind of describe how the event's going,
Mm,
and they need to read those attachments. I send it all beforehand because that's our big meeting that they can refer back to and have in writing. And then by the time we are at the event, like 30 minutes, an hour before the start, that meeting is a refresher or a
mm.
question and answer session.
That's
That's
good.
not the entire meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then the other thing you did, which I thought was brilliant, was you taped all those attachments to a wall of one of our leader workrooms. So
Yeah.
if they didn't want to, fight with their email to find it again, they could just go reference
Hmm.
it quickly off a printed copy. So again,
Yeah.
you're don't like you think about you're dummy proofing it. Like yes, you communicated it in the email, and this is one of the concepts I talk about in communication a lot. Is like we live in like a Netflix culture. So people live it with like an on-demand mindset. And so you
Hmm.
sent it on like a Thursday at 3:30 p.m., but like they were in the middle of like a business meeting. And so it
Hmm.
wasn't in their mind then, but it will be in their mind when they show up on Friday at 6, but like they've gotten 27 more emails since then. And so
Oh, yeah.
where is that? And I think it's brilliant to put it somewhere just quick and accessible. And maybe even another hack that we didn't even do or think about, but like maybe even having like a static like landing page or like QR code that they could like scan and pull open like in just a tab in their Safari. And then that gives them access to everything,
Hmm.
that they need. But yeah, I think that was so smart. So then how do you go about like help us get in your brain? Because you had a couple of volunteers there that I was like, oh, like I wouldn't have thought that they would be here. Not because they did like a bad job or whatever. They weren't like as maybe like involved or like maybe they're only serving like once a month or once every other week like in our student ministry, and like you had
Hmm.
them like in charge of like food or like certain like snack type areas. Like how did you go through and think who am I going to recruit? Because I thought that was one of the other really special things was like you asked a very particular or like dedicated ask for like just very specific volunteers. I didn't feel like you did like an all call, though you did to kind of pick up anyone who might be interested. But then I think you went particularly after like certain names or
Hmm.
certain individuals. How did you like think about them to ask them, and like what goes into determining this person would be good for that? Does that make
Oh,
sense?
yeah. Yeah. Well, you definitely do an all call because, well, we are desperate for people to help. Like, we're not going to act like we're not. But honestly, I just kind of go with the philosophy of I'll never say no for somebody.
Mm,
Like, I think sometimes we do that, even if we say that we're not. We're like, well, they only serve on Sundays and they're very particular about their job. And I'm like, yes, but they also probably like high schoolers. I don't know, maybe
yeah,
the
yeah,
chances are. And so I just kind of like we always have conversations where like, oh, that person would be like so good at this, or if only they do it. And I usually take that person and then ask,
yeah.
like, I
I
make a
love that
list
principle. Yeah,
as I am planning events and I just keep people's personalities in mind. Like we see them work all Sunday and we see them work Wednesday and you kind of see like what things kind of light them up and what things they're like, ooh, can I do anything else but that?
yeah.
And so I just kind of catalog that. And that one I do kind of mentally, but it wouldn't hurt to like make a list of people like I love reaching out to this person for this, this, and this.
Mm,
And I've noticed as I've done events, we have volunteers that really get fired up for events
mm,
like that just being a part of a big beast of a programming thing like kind of lights them up and
yeah.
excites them. And so I have people that I regularly reach out with, like Kyra Allen Lowe. She's one
Mm-hmm.
of our check-in people. I remember when I came in, she was on like some sort of kind of understanding that she was only going to volunteer a couple times because she had some things going on. And I just remember like she was so stoked to do this back to school bash experience that was like a Wednesday night special. I was
Yeah.
like, I bet she would love to do events. And she's been my event check-in person every single time I've
Oh
done an
yeah.
event.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
good.
she loves it.
So you have like you're very in tune to them, like just ongoingly, right? Like you're keeping an
Hmm.
eye as you're doing your job, and so that makes it easier, obviously, than when you go
Yeah.
to think and
Yeah.
recruit for them. I like that
It's
because
not creepy, but
at
it
the
is.
no, yeah, but I think that's part of the that again, that when I saw some of those people there, I was like, interesting, but also awesome. And like that was all kudos to you, right? Like all kudos to you. 'Cause I was like, I wouldn't have thought to ask that person. Like I would have thrown a link in our leader group chat. Hey, anyone want to volunteer? They didn't, and now I'm desperate, you know? And
Hmm.
so yeah,
Hmm.
that was we were more than fully staffed, for the
Yeah.
event. And so that was the other thing. Like how many jobs do you try to give a leader? Like how many are you trying to like let people do double duty? Or is it like,
Hmm.
hey, you're in charge of like food and like that's your job the whole weekend? Like how do you make those decisions?
So some of our jobs, like they feel very crucial and important because they are, but they're not crucial and important in that they happen the entire time of the program.
Like
Like
check-in.
yes,
Yep.
they're a window, a very
Yep.
important window, but then it ends.
Yep.
And you have to remember when you're dealing with these volunteers, they're adults with full-time
Hmm.
jobs. They're high capacity leaders. If they're
Yeah,
there
that's
at your
good.
event, they are high capacity. They don't do well bored or sitting and doing nothing. They want to do something. And if
Right.
they're doing something, that morale is high, and they'll probably do another event because they're like, that was awesome. That was such a rush.
Yeah, it's good.
Yes. So I assign generally like two or three roles throughout the service order to people. So they're like constantly transitioning and moving to do something.
Yeah. And that comes back to your like schedule, your map, and you're thinking
Hmm.
that ahead. Like, okay, do they after this window closes, they can go to this, but then
Hmm.
they maybe can't do this next thing because they're going to be busy doing that. Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
again, that's the next level stuff, Kaylin, that you're very good at. So, okay, so then let's talk a little bit about like food. Okay, how do you
Hmm.
determine how much to order? Like, is it just as simple as like as many as are registered? How do you account for like
Oh,
walk-ins at an event like this where we do leave registration open all the way up until, it starts, and
hmm.
so theoretically a kid could walk in, and do we have enough food for them? Like how do you kind of try and manage that or think about that?
Yeah. It does depend on how big of an invite event this is. Like
Sure.
I think high school weekend was an invite night, but we didn't like push
Yeah.
super
We
hard,
didn't
like
say like bring your
invite new
friends, bring your friends.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So always keep that in mind. Yes, you keep the registration number in mind, but you also want to account for all of the adults in the building. Don't forget yourself or your staff.
Good.
So them, volunteers, and if you're providing food for tech and worship, or if they're doing their own thing, so that all is in that number.
Yeah.
But for registration, I don't want to have too big of a margin because then we're spending a lot of money on food. But things that I can give out as like door prizes, like pizza, I'm a little more willing to have extra of because
Mm.
we could lavish that on a student and make their night. But
Yeah.
like sandwiches, no, because no one wants like a cold, soggy sandwich by the end of one, like 12
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah.
Um, so I would be a little bit more tight on food like that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and also keep in mind that everyone's like, kids are so hungry. They're gonna eat three slices of pizza. You keep in mind the girls because girls don't eat as much food as boys. And
Yeah.
like I definitely like there's camp and retreat food that is great because you're hungry, but it is not a lot of kids' first choice. So they'll eat like one of it.
Yeah.
They'll eat like maybe one and a half. They'll split with a friend.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind. Like the ratio is not as monstrous as you think.
Yeah, I think the ratio I've tried to use for pizza is 2.5 times
Hmm.
your number. So like
I
you
think
take
that's
your
great.
big number of all the people, including tech and worship and check-in and staff and everyone, and then you multiply it by 2.5. That'll give you the total number of slices that you need. And then
Hmm.
you can divide that by 8 because that's how many slices of pizza are in
Yeah.
pizza box, and then that'll give you a number with a decimal, and you can either round up or round down, whatever you feel.
And what's really nice is like you know how you do the random picker
Yeah.
things, like with their name. And
Yep.
for those that don't know, he picks the names and then they just get a random prize for
Yep.
doing nothing.
Yep.
That's great to pack food leftovers too, because you don't want to bank on having extra if you're just kind of guessing, because kids might be really hungry and you don't have it, and then you just lost a prize for a game.
Yeah.
So you want that to be like a random moment that if they don't get it, they have no idea.
Yeah. 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 Good. All right. Let's see. What else do you think about for an event that I'm not thinking even to like ask you?
Oh, listen, you have to know if your church has any sort of like admin team, administrative volunteers that help put these things together with your operations at all, like your facilities and your finance people or whatever it might be. You need to meet with them like way ahead of time. So I start
What's
meeting,
way ahead of time?
yeah, yeah. So I start meeting with people. We've been cutting it kind of close, and cutting it close is meeting 2 months in advance.
Okay.
So you
Which
need
to some of
to
us that might be like, oh, that's when I start thinking about it.
Yeah, no, especially if it's like a really big event, which high school weekend is a really big event for us.
Yeah.
So we need to start planning that months in advance. And depending on like the capacity of your team, that could fluctuate a little bit. Like if it's just you and one other person, I would say probably start looking at that at like 6 months
Hmm.
in advance. If you have a couple other people who can share that brunt, you could maybe do a little bit less, but you definitely need to start meeting with administrative people on your church staff that are handling this because their personalities are a lot different than yours.
Mm.
As a ministry person, you're used to pivoting and being creative and all those things and doing
Pulling it
last
off
minute
at the
things.
last minute.
Yes,
Yeah.
they are not. They
Yeah.
love systems and processes. And if you break their system, it's going to be really, really hard to get them to like be on the same wavelength with you.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. And like in our particular uh setting, we have like our facilities people, like they set everything up for us, which is fantastic. But
Mhm.
to Kaylen's
Yes.
point, like only if we're on top of it. If we slide
Hmm.
in the ninth hour and we're like, this is what we want, they're like, yo, we're already on to like stuff for like later next weekend. Like we've already,
Hmm.
planned our day. So, to her
Hmm.
point, like, and whether, so like here's the thing. I do know if like you're listening, you're like, okay, I don't work at a church anywhere near that has any of that. Like I am the operations, I am the admin. And what I would
Hmm.
say is lean into your volunteers. If you're like, that
Yes.
sounds fantastic. I would love that, but I don't have anyone that works for me, with me on my team, anything like that. Like that doesn't mean you can't do it, and it doesn't mean you still can't delegate and dish out. You just may have to do that at more of like a volunteer capacity. So find a mother or like someone who like works in like an administrative like
Hmm.
role that has a little bit of bandwidth and margin, and like ask them, like I'm
Hmm.
sure if I'm saying that, many of you right now as you're listening, you're like, oh yeah, I could probably ask so and so, like that person's coming to your mind. Like let that
Hmm.
person be your Kaylen for your event. And like yes, we had the luxury of like Kaylen being on our team payroll, but like you don't, they don't have to be, right? And like
Yeah.
setting up, you can, I mean, we employ teenagers, like students, to like come early and do stuff like that. And, we call them, what do we call them? Simps.
Yeah. It's SMP student. As Tommy texts me, and it's super loud. Uh, student. Oh my gosh. He put the do not disturb.
Student
Anyway,
ministry
student ministry
protege.
proteges.
Yeah, protege.
Proteges.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so anyway, we employ them. They get free camp, and stuff
Yes.
like that. But they come early and like set things up. So like they could be your
Hmm.
like facilities team. So
Hmm.
again, as we're saying it, like don't just be like, I'd never be there. Like you for sure can like employ volunteers and
Hmm.
people that'll do it for free, and they like to Kaylin's point. Like
Yeah,
they're,
they
though
do.
that might not be your gifting, and you're like, no one would ever want to run administrative or set chairs up. Like some people genuinely do. And so don't rob other people of being able to serve your youth ministry, God's kingdom, whatever, by not asking them.
Hmm. Hmm.
What else, Kaylin? Anything else? Or do we hit it all?
I just would keep in mind people's personalities. You're gonna have people who, when they're planning events, they just run anxious. Like that's just their personality and that's how they work best. And
Yeah.
so they're gonna ask a lot of questions and they're gonna want to meet with you last minute and their vibe might kind of like make you kind of thrown off because you're like, I thought we had all this planned. Why do you need to meet and double check? They've probably done a great job. They just want to make sure that they've done everything you need to help you.
Yeah,
And
it's
so if
good.
you have someone in your life who is like that, just remember, like, just have your questions kind of written out of what you know that they tend to ask
Mm,
and have those answers ready for them. And that's going to help those meetings go a lot quicker and a
yeah.
lot smoother.
I had a in one of the churches I worked at, I had a volunteer like that. Her name was Sarah. And
Hmm.
the way that I would think logistically when I was planning things, because like I was a one-man band. We had a church secretary 20 hours a week that served the entire church, right? So like I could get some stuff, to for her to do for the youth ministry, but not like she wasn't like there to like at my beck and call for everything. And so as I was like dishing things off to volunteers and whatnot, like my filter in my head was always like, what would Sarah want to know? Right. And so I
Yes.
think that's a good way to think about it is like, think about the volunteer who has the most questions for you and then ask the question like, would the amount of information that I'm sending out, would it satisfy that person? And if
Hmm.
yes, then you're on the right track. If not, then you probably need more detail. So
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
cool. Kaylen, is that it? Do we hit it? Are all events for future and for always going to be planned? Do you think?
I think so.
Love it.
Yeah, probably.
All right. Well, hey, this was how I plan events with Kaylen, not Maltese, Kaylen Adams, and she's awesome. So, Kaylen, I mean, like, can people like follow you like on social media or anything if they want to?
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
where where
Yeah.
where can
Let
they
me
find you?
It's funny, I have to like go double check
You're
what
like,
accounts I've changed my name over
yeah.
to.
Wait, what is it
But
now that I just had to change my social media handles because I just got
I
married?
know. I know. Well, and Instagram is actually really hard to change your last name on. So it hasn't been changed yet, my handle, but my name on there is changed. So you can find me at kmaltais underscore on Instagram. It's KMALTAIS underscore on Instagram. Facebook, Kaylin Adams, look me up. I think that's all that I'm on because I'm old. I
There
don't
you
do
go.
TikTok.
That's
So,
okay. It's banned anyway. So actually, it's back. I don't know if
yeah.
you heard, but all
Oh,
right,
God.
people. Well, I'm signing off for Kaylen. This is Nick. Talk to you next time. Stay hybrid, guys.
Mhm.